morning, Team Alabama. We have chapter 13 today, page 167. The next day was beautiful, with a bright blue sky and a breeze that swept in from the Gulf, bringing with it a welcome coolness. When Georgie opened his eyes as the sunlight brightened his room, he thought, "This is the day that I'll tell her. I'll say, 'Thank you for letting me be the Hatter.' And then I'll say that I like her and I wish I'd liked her a long time ago." He dreaded saying the things that he knew he must. Pulling the sheet over his head, he tried to think things over, to organize his plan of action. Over in the big green-shuttered house, Amanda was cross when she heard Robin climbing out of bed a full hour before she wanted to take up her morning duties. Amanda found it very difficult to rouse herself before 8 o'clock, and to be up and around before 7 seemed senseless and highly disagreeable. "Why can't you keep quiet of a morning, the way you used to?" she asked impatiently. But a minute later, her good nature overcame her irritation, and Robin babbled eagerly, "Feed ducks, feed ducks." She laughed as she swept him up in her arms and carried him into his bath. "Not for an hour or so, little pest. Not till Georgie comes over, and this is Saturday, when Georgie can sleep late, the way Amanda would like to do if you'd behave yourself." When he was dressed, Robin refused to take Amanda's hands when she offered to help him downstairs. "Robin, big boy," he told her, and seating himself at the top of the stairs, he proceeded to scoot down, one step at a time. When he reached the lower landing, he ran quickly, if a bit uncertainly, to the kitchen and to Rosita's arms. "Feed ducks, feed ducks," he repeated over and over, laughing and returning Rosita's hugs for a time, and then growing impatient and struggling to free herself from her embrace. "No, my precious, we can't feed the ducks unless Georgie comes over later this morning. I'm too busy to take you. And as for Amanda," she looked with disapproval at Amanda's wild hair and half-buttoned robe when the girl appeared, "Amanda needs to get herself combed and dressed before she's seen by anyone, even the ducks." She took a slice of bread from the bread box and placed it in Robin's hand. "Here you are, Robin. Go out in the garden and feed the pretty birds, while Rosita fixes breakfast. You go with him, my lady," she added, returning to Amanda. "Tell old Eddie to come in for a roll and coffee when I ring. After you've fed Robin and had a bite yourself, I want you to get dressed before Mrs. Harper gets down." Amanda stretched her arms and yawned widely. "Oh, don't be so grouchy with me, Rosita. You jaw at me like you were my own mother." She grinned at Rosita and took a bottle of Coke from the refrigerator. "That Robin is getting to be a handful lately. Remember last year he didn't hardly make a move on his own. Now it's all I can do to keep up with him." Rosita watched him fondly as he trotted through the backyard toward the garden. "He's stronger, and he's learning any number of little things. I pray every night that some miracle—" She broke off her sentence. From the lake road, old Eddie's truck rattled up to the garden and parked at the gate. The old man climbed down slowly and began to unload bags of plant feed that he had brought from town. He waved to Robin when he glimpsed the child's golden curls against a low green hedge near the gate. "Hello there, Robin. What you doing out here at this hour of the morning?" He came up to the child and lifted him high in the air. "You're getting bigger, Robin. I declare, it's all I can do to raise you off the ground any more. Your ma's going to have another gardener around here to help Georgie and me one of these days." "Feed ducks," Robin babbled, showing old Eddie the slice of bread in his hand. "No, it's too early to feed the ducks, Robin. You wait till your partner gets over here, and then you and him can give the ducks some breakfast." Amanda came out, settled herself on one of the wrought iron benches, taking long swallows of her pre-breakfast Coke. "Go over to the gate, Robin." She was pointing towards the south side of the garden. "Go watch for Georgie. Maybe he'll be coming over pretty soon." She hoped Georgie would come over soon. She turned Robin over to him after warning him loudly enough so Rosita was bound to hear that he should take care no harm came to her little boy, and after that she could go back to her room and sleep until around 11, when Rosita would probably get cranky and shoo her back to work. Robin trotted obediently to the fence, and Amanda pointed out and gazed wistfully across the street towards the school. He called a few times, a garbled attempt to say Georgie, but when there was neither an answer nor an appearance of Georgie, he sighed and resigned himself to further warning. Okay, garbled would be a great word to add to your vocabulist. And there were a couple others that I thought might be something that you might want to add. I don't know if you know wrought iron bench. Okay, it's like a black metal. Usually, sometimes it's white, but most often it's black. Usually a bench that's outside. Top of page 171. Georgie, sleep, he thought to himself. Lazy Georgie, sleep, he thought, and shook his head as he walked away. Finally, he wandered down to the corner where Georgie's rosebush stood, full of bloom and radiant in the morning light. He squatted beside it for a minute, and before he left, he patted the lower stems gently, as he had seen Georgie do many times. After a while, he turned away from the south area of the garden and walked back along one of the flagstone paths. A brown toad hopped out at one point, planting itself stolidly in the middle of the path, while Robin sat down in front of it. They stared at one another earnestly for a long time, and then when a tiny lizard offered to join them, the toad scuttled away. Scuttled could be a word you'd add too. Robin ran after it a little distance. Awkward and uncertain as he got into some of the thick grass, he fell at last into a clump of azaleas. Those are a flowery bush. And had a moment of difficulty in getting to his feet again and retrieving the bread that he had dropped when he fell. Amanda had stretched a great arm along the back of the bench where she sat and leaned her head upon it. She was snoring gently. Okay, so that's a problem here. She's supposed to be watching him. Who's watching him if she's snoring? Okay. Old Eddie was busily feeding Hedges at the west end of the garden, and in the kitchen Rosita was singing as she prepared breakfast. Robin stood quietly looking around him for a while, and then he went over to the bird feeder that the boys over at Georgie's school had made for his mother. He was ready to give the birds a share of the ducks' breakfast, but most of them were finding worms for themselves that morning, and only 2 sparrows lighted on the feeder to watch for the crumbs that Robin threw below. After they had grabbed a quick snack, they flew away, and Robin looked after them gravely, sorry that they cared so little for him or for his gift to them. He soon forgot the birds, however, and chased a butterfly for a few unsteady steps, and then stopped in an area of his mother's rose garden where he buried his nose in the few blooms low enough for him to reach. It was while he was in the rose garden that he saw the squirrel. It was frisky and quick, an impudent little creature that seemed to tease Robin as it approached him for a few steps, and then waved its tail and scampered away. Scampered might also be a good word that you could put in your vocab, or impudent. Robin wanted to touch it and to hold it in his hands and show it to Georgie when he finally came over to play. He followed the squirrel, laughing, but it soon got away from him, darting through a narrow opening between 2 ixoria bushes, an opening so covered with leaves that Robin couldn't have known it was there if he hadn't seen the squirrel run through it. The opening was indeed narrow, and it was all Robin could do to squeeze through it. He was caught by a tangle of branches that tried to hold him back, but he pressed on, proud to be able to do as he chose, to go into new places by himself. His thin cotton shirt was pulled over his head and left hanging in the opening. His face and arms were scratched, and for a moment he was bewildered as he looked about him. The garden suddenly gone, and a wide area of grass and trees and a gravel path stretching before him. Who's keeping an eye on him right now? Who knows where he is? No one. He recognized the big gate first. It was back there that he must always wait when he and Georgie left or came into the yard. Always he must wait while Georgie lifted the iron ring from a post and allowed the big gate to open. Georgie, grandfather, mother, Rosita, and Amanda were always careful about that iron ring. Not until that ring was lifted could Robin ever get outside the gate and onto the sloping path that led down to the lake. Now suddenly he was on the outside all by himself. Without anyone lifting the ring for him, he was able all by himself to take the gravel path, and forgetting the squirrel, to run along laughing at his huge shadow which stayed close to him at every step. It didn't matter that he stumbled and fell occasionally. He would scramble to his feet again and run on, or stop for a minute listening to the birds who were busy in the trees throughout the meadow and into the woods. And from a distance the quail called out to him in loud, clear notes that Georgie knew how to imitate, but Robin couldn't. They were trying to talk to him, he was sure. Those quail hiding in the tall grass far out in the field, they wanted to know, as old Eddie did, what Robin was doing out so early in the bright morning. There were other birds too, much closer than the quail. He looked up, trying to see through the leaves. They could see him, he knew, because they chirped to him and talked to him in the friendly way they always did when he and Georgie walked down the path together. "Cheep, cheep," they would say, and at Georgie's urging, Robin would try to answer them. He tried again and again, so many times that finally the mockingbirds began to mimic him. On this morning, as he stood in the path alone, trying to see the birds in the trees above him, a mockingbird took up his words and tone. Weep, weep. It mocked in the voice of a very little boy. He finally reached the banyan tree where Georgie liked for him to sit quietly in the shade and listen while Georgie said lots of words. Most of the bread that Rosita had given him was gone, but there was a small piece left, enough to bring the silly ducks paddling towards him when he held it out to them. The tiny waves barely lapped at the sand along the shore, and they sparkled, water and sunlight mixing together, the farthest edge of them covering Robin's feet. The water felt cool and fresh to Robin's hot feet, and he stamped in it time and after time, sending splashes up to his waist and making enough noise to frighten the ducks, who watched him eagerly but did not dare approach. After a while he became aware of voices from the garden, many voices calling, "Robin! Robin!" He laughed and chortled. "Feed ducks, he cried as he stood still and held the bread out to the impatient swimmers. Georgie always threw crumbs far out on the water, and the ducks had to paddle madly away from the shore in order to get them. Watching them scramble, darting in one direction and then another, sometimes fighting over a water-soaked crumb, all that was a part of the fun. But Robin was not able to throw the bread. He clutched it tightly, and the eager ducks advanced towards him with hungry quacking. They came at him from all sides, pushing against him, reaching up to peck at the bread in his hand. Robin began to be frightened. He waved his arms and tried to make them go away, but they wouldn't. They pushed against him relentlessly, and when he tried to run from them, he fell, face downward, in the water. That's all for today, guys. The end of page 175. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.